So good evening, everyone. Let me tell you that it is really wonderful to be back at the Beyond the Bars conference here at Columbia University. This is the third conference I have attended. What about those of you in the audience? How many of you have attended at least one previous conference? All right. You may remember that at the first conference, the theme was remove the bars, take action. And at that conference, I felt sort of like a guest. But I was so moved by the presence of so many formerly incarcerated people. And then when many of them spoke succinctly about their accomplishments, I thought to myself, with a crew like this, we can do anything. We can do absolutely anything. At the second conference, the theme was Beyond the Bars, moving forward. I no longer felt like a visitor. And I experienced this palpable connection between all of us that was about the production of a different kind of power, the power to effectively demand institutional transformation, but also personal transformation. And now this community feels like it has consolidated itself, and I feel like I've come home. And I say it feels like home because I am sharing this space with all of you this evening and with my sister Beth Ritchie and my sister Fania Davis. And by the way, we also share a mother and father. Tomorrow is International Women's Day. And so we come together this evening as people all over the world are preparing to celebrate the struggles and victories of working class women everywhere. I can tell you that I'm also very happy to be at this event, the fourth annual Beyond the Bars conference, because it is also a part of a week-long Scholar in Residence program at NYU that I've been doing. So it's really good to see NYU and Columbia collaborating, especially since it is collaboration in relation to prison abolition. So I would like to thank Mancha Diawara and Jaira Placide and the Institute for African American Affairs at NYU. And of course, thank you, Kathy Boudin, for all of your amazing work. And many of you know that in 2003, after more than 2 decades behind bars, Kathy was released. And if one does not even take into account the spectacular work she did while she was in prison, we can say that over the last decade, she has done more for people in prison, more for humanity in general than most people are able to do in an entire lifetime. So I want to thank Kathy and also Desiree and Carly and all of the other dedicated organizers of this conference. You always manage to find the right theme. You always manage to bring together the right people so that over the course of a weekend, we can create a powerful community of resistance whose capacity to bring about change will be evident long after the conference has adjourned. Breaking through. As those of us who have been involved in social justice movements for many years well know, sometimes it is essential for us to pause for a moment and take stock of our victories. Even if our victories are only partial victories, it is important to recognize that these partial victories are evidence of the collective power of our movements, evidence that our struggles are not an exercise in futility. Now, this is not to say that we want to rest on our laurels. On the contrary, victories, no matter how small they are, should serve as an impetus to push forward. And I always think of the wonderful words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb." I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended. And so if finally Marshall Eddie Conway was released on March 5th after almost 44 years in prison, it is not the victory we wanted. He should have been released 4 decades ago, or he should have never gone to prison. But he is free, and the fact that he is free should embolden us to push more strongly for the freedom of Mumia Abu-Jamal, of Leonard Peltier, of Veronzo Bowers, of David Gilbert, and all political prisoners in this country. It was so moving to hear Eddie Conway on Democracy Now! Tuesday morning. Did any of you see the show? He is such an amazing, he has such a warm presence, which came through even across the television waves. And when he spoke, it was so lucid. He spoke about finding an enormous amount of violence when he went to prison. So he said, and I'm just going to read a passage from the transcript. So I started off first trying to, 1, change that violence thing, and then 2, find things which could help enhance the prisoner's life. And it took a long time, but eventually we came up with the Friends of a Friend, a mentoring program in which we actually start training other brothers that have street creds to mentor young brothers and new brothers that came into the prison system. And over the years, this has made a significant difference in terms of street organization conflicts, in terms of resolving problems, and so on. So he's talking about actually impacting what is happening in the community by the organizing that is being done behind bars. And so he went on to say, and it is those people now who are a resource that communities need to use. They have been mentoring for 5 and 10 years. They're still in the prison system, and the problem is that you can mentor and you can help people in the prison system, but they're already stuck in the prison system. And the real problem, he says, the solution to the problem is to address that issue before people get caught up in the prison system. And that resource in the prison system, those mentors, need to be in the community. They need to be working with young people before they get sucked into the prison system, because by that time it's too late. You can do good work on that side of the wall, but you really need to do the work to make the community safer on the other side. And I think that's one of the strongest arguments for abolition that we have. In the recent period, there have been many very important victories here in New York. And so let's take a look at some of them. Solitary confinement. The New York Civil Liberties Union just recently reached a settlement with the New York State Department of Corrections to begin limiting the length of stays in solitary confinement and determining, as the Assemblyman pointed out, who could and could not be put in solitary. Now, this campaign against solitary confinement represents what we might call a radical reform. Abolitionists believe that ultimately we need to dismantle the prison industrial complex and rid our country and our worlds of imprisonment as the dominant mode of punishment. But we also recognize the need to call for efforts to make life more habitable for people who are held in cages today. Now, people have been struggling against solitary confinement, against supermax prisons, against administrative segregation. And in California, those struggles have been led by people inside. And as a matter of fact, last July, more than 30,000 people inside California prisons initiated a hunger strike in response to the failure of the Department of Correction there to meet their demands. And that hunger strike went on for 2 months. It claimed one life. One person died. After 60 days, the strikers suspended the strike, and California legislators committed to hold public hearings about solitary confinement. And so now legislation has been submitted by Tom Amiano, who's one of our most progressive assemblymen. And there are weekly demonstrations in Oakland, California, supporting the prisoners and their demands to end solitary confinement. So there's another area that we might characterize as an area of victory, or maybe not yet victory, but we can glimpse the possibilities of change. Because people have been mobilizing for a long time for change in the parole rules and regulations, and for the release of long-termers. And I think it's really important to recognize that sometimes when we emphasize that people who are innocent should be released, that we are, in a way, confirming the correctness of the continued incarceration of those who are not considered so innocent. But innocence is socially constructed, if you want to put it that way. And so I think it's really important to continue to press for change in the parole board. And as a matter of fact, not very long ago, I read an editorial in the New York Times. It was called New York's Broken Parole System. And I think it was around the middle of February, maybe about 3 weeks ago in the New York Times. And of course, the release of Eddie Conway should give us hope, because we have not done well with so many long-termers who have not been released. We did not do well with respect to the release of Herman Wallace, who died almost immediately after he was released. And we did not do well with Marilyn Buck. And let us remember the power and the poetry she produced for our movements. But I know that there are organizations, there is RAP, Returning Aging People from Prison, and I think that some people from RAP may be in the house this evening. And so we see possibilities of victory there, and we have to continue to struggle. There have been important breakthroughs in the area of higher education in prison. And let us recall the dismantling of education programs following the Clinton administration's recension of Pell Grants for prisons. Don't forget that it was the Democrats who did that. And of course, there have been many efforts to reinstitute degree programs in various prisons across the country, but it's a slow process. And so it's good that in this state, Governor Cuomo has announced that he will fund the establishment of higher education in 10 prisons in New York. I don't know why only 10 prisons, but 10 prisons. And as important as it is to acknowledge this victory, we have to go much further and call for public funding for all people in prison who want to have access to higher education. And we also have to make sure that once people are released, they're able to continue their education. Both here at Columbia and at NYU, student activists have been conducting an extremely important campaign to abolish the box. Abolish the box. And everybody knows what the box is. That question on the student application, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And of course, this is connected to the Ban the Box campaign with respect to job applications. At Columbia and other colleges, I know there's a campaign to disinvest money, funds that support private prisons and prison-related products. And I think this divestment campaign should be linked to other boycott and divestment efforts, such as the BDS campaign, which targets the occupation of Palestine. One of the major targets of the BDS campaign is a private security company that owns and operates prisons all over the world. But as a private security company, it has its tentacles in everything, including sexual assault centers in Britain, for example. And of course, feminist activists have been saying for a very long time, and you will hear about this from Beth Ritchie, that connections and intersections are what it's all about. Connections with restorative justice, and my sister Fania is going to speak about that, with efforts to end violence against women. So let me just say, I'm almost out of time here, that the company G4S, it's the third largest private corporation in the world. It's third only in relation to Walmart and Foxconn. And on its website, you will see this quote that they offer us. In more ways than you might realize, G4S is securing your world. And so you might add, in more ways than you might realize, G4S has insinuated itself in our lives under the guise of security and the security state. From the ways Palestinians experience political incarceration to racist technologies of separation and apartheid, from the wall in Israel to prison-like schools in the US, to the wall along the US-Mexico border. And G4S also provides transportation for deportees who are being ushered out of the U.S. into Mexico and ushered out of Britain to countries in the global south, in Africa. There was the case of Jimmy Mubenga, who was killed on a flight during his deportation by G4S guards. But let me end by saying that when I think back, thinking about where we have come over the last, how far we have come over the last years, when I think back to the first critical resistant conference, which took place in Berkeley in 1998, and then shortly thereafter there was one in New York, in this city, so some of you may have been there. I realized that we could not have imagined that we would be where we are today in 2014. Then our theme was beyond the prison industrial complex. And we realized that if we were to move beyond the prison industrial complex, we would have to build a broad-based prison abolition movement. And prison abolition would mean so much more than prison abolition. It would mean the abolition of gender policing. It would mean an end to sexism and homophobia, both inside and outside the walls. It would mean jobs and education and health care for all. It would mean an end to ableism, an end to assaults on immigrants, and an end to war and torture. It would mean radical reconstruction of our societies. It would mean a new world. Thank you.